Oh, welcome, my brother. And a Shaolin honor and bow to you, my beloved brother.
Oh, of course. Um, all peace, all universe, brother. I'm very humbled to be here, man.
I was aiming not to languish you with accolades, but I must, so that our friends can hear you. And I know you're such a humble man. But we met a few years back through this medium, through a mutual friend. And then the moment I came on your page, I was really blown away. For those of you who don't know my brother Memnon, I've been sharing about and I've been posting your posts on our Warrior Sage page. For me, you're an epitome of the Renaissance man, the warrior and the sage. You're a extreme martial artist, you're a bodybuilder. On your page, you have feats of incredible strength, incredible agility. You're a violin player, a musician, a physicist. And also, what really touched me deeply is your sharing of African wisdoms. And, you know, it's very close to my heart because I was born in Uganda. I come from East Indian descent, but I was born in Uganda. And I believe that Africa is the birthplace, the motherplace of all beings. And so I'm very grateful for you to be here today and that you're taking your time out of your intense training schedule. And I'd love you to just kindly share a little about yourself from your own self so our good friends get to know you a little bit more.
Well, uh, you know what you mean to me. You and your beautiful wife. Uh, so very dearly humbled by all of the accolades you just. I am not worthy, of such a gratefulness to have such bliss. I just try to be in this life, just a student, just to try to learn and cultivate at each moment. So basically, the kind of theory of my life, or I guess the overall thesis is, um, I people talk about wanting perfection, wanting excellence. I just kind of took that literally and said, if that is the case, what lifestyle, maturates itself from that. Those adjectives are very high, and if you say them, there has to be some form of condensed, milking, of that lifestyle to perform the behavior. So I grew up. I basically had three older brothers. I was the baby, and ultimately, all of them was well, not much older, but old enough where I was pretty much the only child left in the house. Uh, During my time, I was a kid who um, kind of isolated himself in a way, in a sense where I always wanted greatness. I just would do things to kind of, make that a form of appropriation in my life one way or another. So around in 12th grade, as I moved forward and was going, to out of high school, it really started to tinker down, and I really started to become myself and not who high school kind of I was playing a facade for a minute before I really, was and encompassed my being. So from that standpoint, for me, my life from that journey, because I would probably started from there, because that's when I could go back when I was 11 years old and 9 years old, because I've been training all my life. My father was very, he didn't have all of the articulation to it, but he wanted to make sure that we were physically mature in order to protect our women and our children, and make sure that we were always prepared from a physical standpoint. So I've been training from that standpoint from a very long time into every type of form of art you could imagine. Um, However, going back to where I was in 12th grade and moving on, what had happened is I just became myself. And what that is was I wanted to ultimately uh, define myself as showing what excellence is. And through that compass of me doing that, it came with a load of practices. So, somebody can practice themselves physically, lift weights. Then there's a practice for intelligence. You have memory, you have speed, you have sagacity. You have all of these things that is connected to the brain. And what I realized it was that you must focus on all of those things to form a totality. I started, my prayers went up, my meditations went up, because there are two different things that you do in both. So I started just incorporating in my life, from that stage, all these forms of practices. I don't believe, um, in taking anything from anyone, because I believe each being has its own signature. So I wanted to define and create my own. There's two words always inside, I believe we have, called, is one is I am, the other is I create. And I think through those two axioms, you'll be able to create your own world and create things to make them come to life. And I totally believed in that. So as time moved forward and it was moving on, I just started putting all forms of practices on every single level of the being. I don't believe we are condensely human. I believe we are being. You know, you always hear the analogy where beings, having a human experience. There's something to that, specifically, because a lot of times people can say that, but it's not really an articulation in a really form of claiming that identity. What I realize is that we can achieve perfection, and it's not perfection in the human part, because the human part is a very isolated, um, I would say, is a very isolated in its subjectional, because you got sizes, shapes, forms, all of these different things that put the human kind of ideology in place. But the being, in that image and likeness, the being can be perfected. And what that being is for me, was about mastering your will. It's like, if you, everything that you say you can't do, first ask the question, could you do it? Right? And what would it take? So if the answer is yes, then ultimately you can control that. You just don't have the discipline to do it. So what I started finding out from that form of psychology is that anything, if you master the will, you can ultimately identify and master yourself at the highest level. So what I did was, with all these practices, as time went on and time went on, is that I was mastering my will. If you know what to eat and you still eat it, right? That's
Yes.
still, that's you doing it. If you know not to go this place and you still go, that's you doing it. If you know you should be doing things, or you should be practicing something and you don't do, you don't have the will to do it. So if you master your will, for me, then you can accomplish all things in life. So my life has spun in a form of psychology of God being the totality and the ultimate, for me to focus on that part of myself, which is the God and the ultimate. So ultimately, I shed myself as a human altogether, and I ultimately perform myself in my life as the being completely. And it is not something, um, people read in mythology and people say, about people walking on water, or about people flying, or about all of this stuff. For me, I wanted to show from a very being perspective, walking in this earth, that you can achieve that, and you can show people, whether it is a metaphysical form or physical form, that you can achieve every single thing to make you the ultimate and total being from every single way. It's all a matter of time, will, practice, behavior, individuality, and spirit. So for me, when you master those things, and I'm not a master, always a student. And when you're a student, you're always cultivating, you're always creating. I am my create. And as time was moving and moving on, just like you build your muscles up from a physical, visual perspective, I was building myself up from a spiritual, intellectual, psychological, and social standard. So from that, from an inner guide, I was just following that, because I believe we have scripture inside of us. So when you say that, what does that mean? That means if you are closing your eyes long enough, those voices inside of you, because we all have them. You close your mouth right now, we can hear ourselves talking if we want to talk. That inner guide, if you spend enough time with it, it ultimately gives you scripture for yourself. And I know that for a fact, because it's things that, as you move along and progress in life, those things will tell you things. And then you ask questions to those things. And then you ask more questions, and then you get the answer. Then you get more questions, then you get the answer. And each one of them is a psychological and a physical and spiritual, and in that level that you are moving and perpetuating yourself to emotion that's going to make you undeniably ultimate. So I do not believe in human whatsoever. I believe in the total perfection of being. I believe it can be accomplished if you are mastering your will, mastering your dedication. It brings a discipline to your life, to yourself, and it's impossible once you live that way to ever fall off track.
Oh, thank you. This piece, the essence of what you shared here, the mastering of the will, the recognition that we are being, that we're not just a small contracted human alone. We might have this animal body, but in essence, we are being. And then there's a perfection of that being that can be expressed through this domain of reality, this human existence, this life existence. Did you ever, when I look at your videos, when I see what you do, some of the feeds seem incredible, like incredulous. And I look at it and I go, is there a point where you face, what I want to ask you is, when you're facing, do you face a resistance? Let's say, for example, you're wanting to lift more, or you want to stretch yourself a little more. All of us at home, how do we find the place where we're like, okay, we know what we need to, you said it, we know what we need to do, but then what happens that we don't do it and we succumb, we collapse? How do we bridge that succumbing and collapsing to activation of the will and then cultivate the strength from that?
That's a great question. And what you have to do is like any training, like let's put it in a visual form, right? So if a woman gets pregnant, right, she ultimately takes 9 months to have birth. There's not a form of rush for that. You know it's a ultimately natural process. That there's the sperm, the egg, the obviously the embryo, all of that stuff happens. It happens naturally. Then the woman starts progressively, her belly will get more swollen as the cycle of each day increases. Everything with yourself is not really performed within a day. It's like if someone say, you know what, I want to quit cigarettes, I don't want to smoke anymore, and they ultimately would try a patch or they try to just cut it down to, go cold turkey. That's not really a really good way to go. You're subjecting yourself to have a hard and cold backtrack of what's going to happen to you. What you do is you do it slowly. You take one away, you take a half away, you take whatever you have to do in order to make progress. Because even if it's a baby foot, it's still more than you did the day prior. So how we master it is, if I know something I need to do, I first identify it and I say, you know what, this is something that I need to get done. And there's obviously, I know I need to do it. So what I'm going to do is, maybe not today, I'm going to do it fully, but I'm going to do just a little bit more so I can then increase myself in my practice. And then with any practice, you have ultimately, it's like if you wanted to do a split, people, I want to do a split. I want to be able to kick this high. And what do is you can't do that right then because you're not flexible enough. But if you can ultimately do a little bit each day and you not tricking your mind to saying, listen, I'm not doing it. I'm not seeing any results. I don't have the patience for it. All of that stuff starts clouding you as delinquent, right? There's all of those doubts, the devourer, the true devil of yourself, right? The one that don't want you to maturate or devalue you and your whole life. So you ultimately are seeing only pessimistic side. So we have to now increase ourselves optimistically, I believe. And that's how you do it. Is ultimately it has to start with the will. Because if you say I want it, you ultimately have already saying you want to do something. So just do a little bit. You don't have to do and increase yourself to an astronomical level. You can do it at a very kindergarten level. If you do it at a kindergarten level, what happens? Again, there's levels. Then you go to first grade. Then you go to second grade. Then you go to third grade. And then what happens once you start seeing progress? Visual things and seeing progress or knowing something you didn't do and you can do now because you've been practicing increases all of the serotonin and the dopamine and all of those things that's going to make you feel happy and increase your will a little bit more, because all of those things, as you keep doing them progressively, it enhances you because you're happy and you're happy to be seeing results of yourself. This is why literally you'll notice when people lose weight, right? And they notice they're losing weight, they can't stop taking pictures of themselves and they want to go further. right? And they want to go more further because they feel proud of themselves so much that they want everybody to know they feel proud of themselves because it's that natural endorphin, that natural excitement. I want to show myself. I want to show what I've done in this world. I want to make show people how good I feel about myself. There's no different. There's no different. You just got to do a little bit at a time. You can't think you're going to build, Egypt or build a continent or build a country within a day. You got to take little parts. The main thing about it is that you got to be patient with yourself and give
Mm.
yourself credit for what you're doing. Because another big thing out of this is that you got to be very easy with yourself, and you can't come down on yourself hard. You have to always give yourself inspiration because whether you know it or not, the subconscious is always recording everything you do inside your mind. So you have to be happy. You have to know that you do something. Give yourself pep talks. Give yourself accolades. Be proud of yourself. Be happy of yourself and don't degrade yourself. Those things increase you little by little, because not everybody is built with that type of will like that. They have to grow it, and you can grow your will. You just got to do it in increments of time. You can't do everything in one day.
Oh, thank you.
I hope it made sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Incremental, step by step. Make sure that you honor yourself, value yourself, take the kindergarten all the way up, and not aim to have huge feats overnight, because that can be self-defeating in oneself. We aim too high for our current capacity and we fail, then the register, the imprint of the subconscious mind of self is that I didn't make the bar. So we make an X in the back of our mind and make a goal once again and intention. Press ourselves, move ourselves beyond, and we really become valiant at that and we put a high ideal out there, and yet we don't fulfill that. It's another X. So it's better to have a small little one. That's easy. I can do that. Move the will forward. It's a little stretch, a little stretch. Before you know it, you look back and you've achieved great goals, but in incremental self, if you will, in a way that rises yourself. You're not aiming to meet anyone else's standard. You're aiming to meet the standard of your own barrier, of your own resistance, the sharpening of your own will.
Exactly.
I wanted to,
Exactly.
what are the ways, you share sometimes about the ways that we can degrade ourselves as men, as women, and many times in this realm of conscious growth, we talk about what to aspire to. I also would love to ask you, what are the self-degradations in being, and how can we avoid those or deal with them as they arise?
Can you say that again? It was kind of jump. It was jumping around a little bit. Can you ask that again?
Absolutely. What are the ways? So you share about the ways to uplift yourself. What are the degradations that we need to be aware of to avoid?
Got you. Well, definitely um, the degradations is going to be anything that is going to shift your energy in a very petulant manner. Meaning, if you have people who are not about good spirit, they're not grateful, they're not they're not joyful within their spirit, or they're always complaining, or they're doing something, you know. You have to watch that because a lot of times it's twofold to that. Because number one is you're bringing that energy to you. So is there something about yourself that is bringing the picture of that person towards you? So you got to take a look at yourself. The second thing about that is if you do just happen to be around that, whether it's family or friends, you can't be around them at all. So you have to keep people with that type of energy away, because what they do is, again, your subconscious is constantly recording all the time. So you got to have you make sure your energy is clear with individuals. So you want to make sure those people is not there. The next thing you want to do, as far as degradation wise, is you want to make sure you're not watching any programming. You don't have the TV on. You're not watching the news. You're not watching media influence things. You're not watching things with violence. You're not watching things that are degrading within themselves. Again, because visual context, right, is going to go within you one way or another, and it basically becomes part of your subconscious mind. And it will come out in some form of consciousness, whether it's a matter of a reflex or whether it's something that jumps out of you once something happening that you don't agree with. So you have to then watch things that you watch yourself. The next thing is that you have to constantly feed yourself things that are divine. Constantly. That means constantly reading things that are nurturing the soul. That means constantly, if you are watching something, you're nurturing the soul. If you have friends around you, you're making sure those are nurturing individuals from the soul, and ultimately you're keeping yourself feeding the right wolf that you have within yourself, because you're keeping yourself truly nutrient, because we all have both wolves in ourselves, right? And ultimately is, however, whatever you feed inside yourself is ultimately what you're going to get, because all of those things is all inside of us. So ultimately, are we going to feed the God, or are we going to feed something that is demonic within inside of us, which is about degradation, devaluing, envy, lust, greed, all of those things that hang on with that? Are we going to feed things or omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, divinity, celestial things? All of those things have to be fed constantly, right? Keeping yourself in that form of awareness, because then you'll get a natural happy. And it's like when you do see something that is bad for the soul, it's like you drinking, your soul will be irritated and you'll get away from it, because it's like salt you drinking. Like you say you were on a diet and you had no sugar for a month, and all of a sudden somebody give you something loaded in sugar. You be like, you'll spit it up. You're like, oh my gosh, like what is this? It's like I could taste everything now. It's no different with the soul. Everything just like that. The physical, one responsibility the physical has is the physical shows you kind of the natural results of things from that what you can do in physical form. It shows you, like if you practice punching, right? All the time, you get better. You practice kicking, you'll get better. If you practice anything physical, your muscles and everything will learn. If someone did splits and they want to do splits and they stretch themselves 6 months, right? For 6 months, for 3 months, it don't even matter. They'll be better than they was when they started. So the physical has a way of giving and being the blueprint to show us the way in order for us to really perform. So if the physical is really the lower part of ourselves, then you have the astral, the obviously the spiritual, the soulful, all of those things, intelligence have no limit. They're limitless, right? The physical form has a form of limit to it. So it's showing us in a way on how do we perform in everything once it's practiced. So again, how you perform that is that you keep yourself away from bad energy things, just like you would do if you were on a diet and you were saying, I got to stay away from sugar, or I got to stay away from salt, or I got to stay away from that. If I want to be truly healthy, if I want to be truly that, there's no different from the soul. You got to keep yourself away. The representation of the sugar is people who are bad energy. The representation of the salt is the watching the television programming. The correlation between anything that is bad or degrading as far as you doing or watching and all of that, everything all combined, all of that stuff from the physical standpoint can be metaphysically looked at from an internal standpoint, because it all means kind of the same thing. So if you look at it in general, you're basically just following the blueprint on which the physical teaches us. It teaches us on how we should be looking at things that are really the soul, the spirit, the intelligence. All of those things are limitless. So you can imagine how far and how deep you can go if you just put in yourself in the right perspective and keep yourself clean and pure. And then physical shows us that. So it's no different.
Noticed in a very interesting way the living of this principle that you shared on your page through this whole COVID crisis. I've noticed you've been very silent about the whole matter. And part of our warrior sage philosophy is to cultivate silent power, not to allow ourselves to get engaged in the emotional rising and the tides and the evocation and the Velcro mentality of sucking us into spiraling down, emotionally riled up. Please share about that whole spectrum from your experience.
Well, I think, as far as the virus is concerned, is that I don't I don't find myself emotionally attached to human ideology things, or this perspective that's going on in their world, in a sense, because I want to this. You have to get the whole picture and the whole story before I really contemplate something um, about it. I'm not if you're not a physician, you can roll out just information that people have been giving you, right? That's all people will do. They're like, all right, I heard this on the news, or I heard this study, or I heard this study. And you start going about all of these different studies and all of these different things that everybody is kind of putting as a cumulative all together, and then ultimately give you something that's a conspiracy on one hand, give you something that's sort of accurate on the other hand, give you something that maybe something they heard on YouTube. So it's all of these different things that's going on. How do we, the isolated value is, at the end of the day, is that you have to really study for yourself. And as when you study for yourself, you have to study yourself, right? You have to study on how you look at it or what you're doing about it. And then you go to other individuals and say, okay, from a clinical perspective, this is what it says. This is what it says over here. And form your own opinion about it. But for me, in general, I stayed away from it because everything is just gossip, really, at a point. I know at the end of the day that any virus, any virus, it ultimately, whatever it is, you cannot have a cure. There's no real medicine for you to have a cure to a virus. Bacteria, you ultimately have medicine for bacteria. But viruses, from a clinical perspective, there's no real, you have to kind of sweat that out, or you have to get it out of you. So basically, for me, it's just been about control, right? It's about, listen, if I know something is out there, what is the obvious thing you should do? One, you don't put yourself in a situation. It's just like, you know what it's like? If you're in a relationship and you say, listen, I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I'm going to cheat on my wife, or I'm not going to cheat on my husband. So I'm not going to be in those situations. That's going to put me in a situation, even though I'm strong-willed, even though I've taught myself and I live in honor, and it's not going to happen, right? And I live by a code, and I live by matrimony, so I'm not going to do it. What you still do is like, why would I go to a party filled with women that's naked, right? Why would I do that? Right? Because it's ultimately, no matter how much will I have, and I wouldn't do anything. However, why put myself in a situation, right? It would that wouldn't be an educated situation from a being perspective, right? You're like, I'm not going to do that because it makes no sense. Why put myself in a situation? So you think about all the other scenarios that it just can do either way. So that's how I kind of look at this. I say, you know what? At the end of the day, it's a virus. I'm not going to put my situation, I'm not going to put myself in a situation to get it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to enhance my immune system at the highest level. I'll double the doses, or I will triple the doses, or I'll do as many doses as possible. That is that is healthy for me to do, for my body and body type, and for my mind and my mind type. And I'll take the necessary things that's going to keep my immune system at the highest level. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the requirement with staying away from people. I'm not going to touch things. I'm not going to move around and put myself in a situation where I'm in and out the house, or I'm talking to people longer than I should. I will do everything that's possible to not put myself in that situation. And I think really that's the only real antidote to it, because they could spin this thing any way they want. I just refuse to be controlled by the media or controlled by anything. If someone says something and they identify it, I say, okay, it's identified. We have cases, which is valid, right? If it's something that's airborne, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I don't put myself in a situation for it. And I kind of just leave it at that. I don't think we have here in the United States, we have an we have an intelligent administration. So it's nothing that they're going to be able to do in order to be trusted. So ultimately, because is a thing when you think about monetary and you think about things that are money, and you think about you're not a man, and you have wrong things on your mind because you're not cultivated in the masculine, you make poor decisions. So for me, and knowing that structure, I just follow my own code of it, and that's just basically what it is, brother. I don't put myself in a situation, and I try to tell people within that, don't put yourself in a situation.
Prevention is always better than cure.
Exactly,
Mental, emotional, spiritual, always.
exactly, exactly. You know, um, it's just like how OSHA, we would have our own colony, man. That's it. You know, we have our own camp, and we be around our own people, and we're not mingling. That's it.
You said something very powerful about the character of men and being a man. And I know you share quite prolifically about the cultivation of character as a man. And I know from my experience in men's work, providing men's training, there's been an erosion of the cultivation of character in masculine essence. I'd love you to share what that means to you, what us as men today must aspire to, and what does it mean to be a man in this century, in this time?
I think man is the protector, provider, the pillars, and um, he is the sustainer of the family. So ultimately, what that means is a man has to be cultivated in a posture of divine. He has to live himself through daily practices, daily duties that are against any form of foul, degradation, uh, putrid behavior of any kind. He must make sure that he's practicing and he's able to teach his woman and his family things that are necessity for survival, it's a necessity for intelligence, necessity for spirituality, necessity for soul, to make sure that the woman who is the earth, metaphysically, in my world, to make her feel at total bliss. Because once the woman is in total bliss, I believe the home is in total bliss because that's what the feminine energy brings. So for me, a man, he must be captivated in all of those faculties, and that means he must have practices in all of those faculties. He should be practicing on how to defend his family constantly. He should be practicing and leading his family in meditation and prayers. He should be leading and practicing his family and raising their intelligence. He should be leading and practicing his family on understanding language and practicing language and showing things and exploring things and going deeper into being with his family. He must have those things and make constant cultivation of his family and be against all forms of degradation, foul, or any forms of ill behavior. He must not perform himself in any undivine form. And this it must be those daily practices that come with that. Because once you have daily practices, again, you're cultivating yourself to express the behavior. And when you express the behavior, manhood becomes very easily because it's very easily with no shadow of a doubt that whatever the man when he performs and he is of that statuesque form of that divine form, the woman will easily let him lead on any way whatsoever. She lets him and allows him to take the way because she trusts him with the keys. That's the way it works. And there's a natural order to the universe. There's a masculine and a feminine way that we proceed in this life. So ultimately, I believe that once man is able to sustain his duties, then the woman can trust him better. And I think if the man is well in a household, I think then the household itself is bliss because he's again performing the duties of the masculine and he's making sure his woman is completely taken care of in any way, in any form of, in all ways, in all the ways that was previously stated. So I think, do we have men now? No, I think women have completely. I don't think a lot of women know what real men are from a statuesque principle. I think the society has now made women adapt to what a man represents from a social perspective, from a social ideology. I think they kind of just accept it. And then because of that, I believe um, the society becomes inconsistent. And I think that when you become inconsistent, that starts to lead to ill behavior within a relationship. So I think constantly um, we have to be performant. We have to have daily practices in life. We have to be kind of stretching ourselves to make sure that those duties and those practices are performed. So the behavior can be expressed and the household is living in this posture, upright, divine, through the masculine and feminine. So, do I think that it's men today? No, I don't. I think it's a very small percentage, um, and that's why there's a lot of inconsistency in households because ultimately the man is broken, you know, from society, and is not in his true form. And when man is not in his true form, again, man being protector, provider, the pillars and sustainer, when a man is unstable and inconsistent, the pillars fall from the home. When the pillars fall from the home itself starts collapsing. So then you'll start seeing all of these other things go out of order. And then ultimately the relationships wind up breaking itself down one way or another. So that's how I feel, brother.
I've definitely noticed this in my relationship with humanity for 30 years now.
Mm,
And that is whenever I'm not in my integrity, whenever I'm not in the center and the pillar of these practices, of my own inner spiritual practice, whenever I'm wavering or getting lazy, or I'm not in the center of my being, it's magnified in her. She feels irritated, she feels out of balance, out of kilter, and 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 I've come to recognize I could say, hey, that's your fault, that's over there, and all that. But I've learned wisely to look within myself and say, am I grounded? Am I living my own dharma? Am I living in the centeredness of what I know for myself to be the highest and the fullest expression of myself this time? And when I am, and I say yes, all of a sudden, body, mind, heart says, she naturally arises in a devotional disposition. Her beauty naturally arises, her openness, her flow, her feminine beauty is magnified. And also my son and my daughter come into alignment with this. So I'm very much in agreement that us as men have a very powerful responsibility to be the magnificence that the Creator has given us, to be the full expression of being. Now, taking that deeper, for those who have no idea of how to start creating practicing, one I remember once you shared your day, what it looks like, your schedule. You gave us a sneak peek at your schedule. Would you just share a little bit about that, and perhaps how we can choose or pick pieces that we can start off, start the incremental journey?
absolutely. So my day starts every day. I want to be up before the sun rises every day. Every day. That means seven days a week, right? When I get up, I do three different things. The first thing that I do is I have a meditation, um, and then I have a prayer right after that, and I go right into my first intelligence testing for the day. And my first intelligence testing for the day is for memory. So I do my memory testing in the morning. I'd have one prayer and then one meditation, both again distinctly different. Altogether, I have nine prayers and meditations combined a day, and then I have two physical practices a day, along with about 15 minutes for each area of the brain testing that I do. So that's focus, that's memory, that's frontal lobe, which is basically centered in the consciousness. That's the stem, that's the left hemisphere, and all of these things that connect it. So I have all these different games that, math tests that I give myself, logical testing that I give myself, puzzle clarification testing that I give myself. So I do all of these things. Mostly they're done in the morning. And then I have one physical practice in the morning where I do 2,000 punches, 2,000 kicks, and I do around about 150 sit ups after that. So then after that, I ultimately, that pretty much starts my day, um, pretty much for the most part. And then um, as my day goes on and I'm at work and everything, I'm very fortunate that, have a job to give me my freedom, with beautiful company. So I'm able to basically be in my office and continue, my practices, and that'll last all day long. And it'll be certain things that I may study. So the main part of my day is I have 7 books that I read a day. I pick out 7 for basically 2 week time. So those 7 books that I read, I basically takes 10 minutes with each book. Each book. Sometimes that could be a book, and I may not get to all 7 in one day because I'm still reading number 5, because it intrigued me to a certain extent. I want to keep that going. However, there's a 7 cycle. Everything that I do is based on the numbers 9 and 7. Basically 9, actually, more than anything, because 9 is the number of perfection, is the number of the total being. So again, we're talking to our subconscious. And I want my subconscious to know that I think is I am, and I think is I create, and I think is the perfection. So I want to constantly remind myself, because from a cultural perspective, in ancient Africa, the number 9 was always about total being and perfection, whether it was the Dogon, whether it was Kemet, or whether it was the Hulsa, and so on. So for me, I'm always putting everything on that number. So again, this will last pretty much throughout all my day. And then I get to my physical practice, which basically that'll be the one, if anything, I'll show to Facebook. And you'll see all of those videos where it's always dark in there and everything like that, because that's pretty much my night practice. So I'll have about 5 different exercises that I do. And right when I get to towards the end, or something that'll be recorded to a certain degree, because a lot of things I don't show because I can't, because those things are just sacred enough for me not to be, I know there's a lot of crazy stuff you see, but there's a lot of crazy stuff people don't see, either. And the things I just can't show. I'll show you one day, but it's not for everybody, right? So ultimately, that'll be pretty much my day. And then before I go to bed, I have one more um, rationalization test, where I go over before I sleep what have I learned in the day, and I will talk to myself inside, not outside. I'll stand in a form of meditation, and I go over everything that I learned today, and I won't say a word. And I pretty much will talk inside myself and go over every single thing that I learned, and I won't get out of that meditation until I'm able to remember and go over things and answer questions of myself. So, put that in perspective. If I'm having difficulty one day, at any time, I punish myself for not knowing. I'll stay in that meditation. I keep my eyes closed. Um, and I'll be in that meditation until I'm able to remember every single thing. And it's sometimes that even got me, I'm laughing at it now, but my previous like relationship I had used to get me in trouble, just because I won't come out of it until I'm able to recycle all of those things. And she's waiting in the bedroom, and you know how that go. So there are things pretty much that I do. Um, Pretty much every night is some form of cycle of that. But again, when you talk about total perfection of being, what does that encompass? It doesn't. It encompasses every single element of your life. Is that single cultivation all your life? So whether I'm at everything, I've self-taught myself so many things. Um, I couldn't even I couldn't even write them down all down. But it's again about total ascension, that total perspective, that total dedication to yourself, that total discipline to yourself. What does it look like? I try to show the world and show people how God really would choose us to live, the innate perfection that we all have. How that when you tap into that, you're invincible. And that's from a very mind perspective. You know that there's nothing you cannot do. And then you cycle your will to make sure that it's there as a practice. And that has been all my life. All my life. I pretty much have dedicated myself to the God spark of the individual.
Oh, oh. shared earlier, this is very prolific on your page. You share all the great wisdom teachers of Africa, all the different nuances. You've been lighting up my eyes for years. My my mentors, one of my teachers, spiritual teachers, his name is Papa Hakim. He was in Egypt. And he started opening my eyes to the African tradition. And then when I came to you, opening very widely. Can you please share about your love of and your sharing of these Africans, what inspires you, and what we need to know for those who have no idea about the breath?
I heard I couldn't hear the last part. Say the last part again.
Can you please share with us your love of and why you share about the depth of the breath of these African wisdom?
Why I share the African wisdom?
Yes.
Well, it is many reasons. That's a great question. There's many reasons for that. One is that I take my heritage. It's all that I live for. All that I wouldn't say all that. Well, is a major part of my identity. Um, the ancestors that have come before me, I treat them. They're everything in my life. Every single element on what they have shared on this earth. They have not had their stories told in a perspective. They have not believed, I believe, sure they saw their dreams and what their children um, of the soil should be like, or should look like, or should do, or live in that spirit, in that way of that total African identity. Um, Everything that has been taught from a Western perspective, which basically dominates the cycle of the world, um, have not identified the true African in any way whatsoever. So ultimately, everybody, not just Africans around the world, everybody within all the Europeans, all Asians, everybody, they all have to be re-educated because their history books are a total contraption of lies and deceit and ultimately cover-ups of everything. It's just a known fact. So with knowing that and knowing the structure that has been broken down and about Africans across the world not loving themselves, not knowing themselves, wanting to look like other races, not taking pride within themselves. That that to me cannot happen. It can't happen from a cultural identity perspective. It can't happen from a ancestral perspective, and it can't happen from a God perspective. So for me, I am my study of my people is a form, constant form. So I wanted to know every single language of Africa. I wanted to know every single book that's ever been. I wanted to know every single person that has had a structure. And I wanted to put it inside this mind and to be able again to retort it and be able to show the world what Africans and what African perspective totally means and what it looks like. Because Africa and African just means people of the sun. You, me, your wife, everybody, people of the sun, people who are part of the carbon, people of the society, right? It just means that the people of the firstborn, the people of the sunny land, the people who are the sun people, the people with the burnt feet, however you want to, there's so many different languages on, it all means the same thing. But that's all that means, being African. It's not actually meaning a continent. It's ultimately meaning identifying a people who were born. So for me, because of the miseducation of the society and the tumultuous education of the society, when all they want to talk about is all of the drudgery and all of these things, when we have been here for 819,000 years, and ultimately 11,000 of those years have been recorded in an allegory and a hieroglyph or some form of literature. So I try to concentrate on all of those things, not 400 or 300 years or any of those years that basically Western perspective brings it to the forefront. So it's very important to me. Ancestors are my life. They are my life. They are the living vessel in which I try to show not only the honor to the ancestors in every single country, within Africa, with every single state in the United States, everywhere in Canada, everywhere in Western Asia or in Asia, period. I try to show from a global perspective the true identity from the African, from an ancestral perspective, from a historical perspective, and from a God perspective. And most importantly, I want to show it in form and the identity perspective of how I live my life, the discipline I lead my life, the divinity that I lead my life in, and in the total morality that I live my life, and the discipline, integrity, all of those things. I want to show them in all forms of what the African is really representing in this society, and make people one way or another, maybe 100 years from now, so that we get out of the Western context of history, of ideologies, and we move away from all things Western, because Western has been the crux of misappropriation of identity and the center of every African story as the enemy to their degradation. So ultimately, what I try to do is I try to erase that by showing them those perspectives, because that is my life.
To wrap up today, I just want you to know you have so much love and respect, and I am certain that everyone listening here has received so much from your shares, and mostly who you are, what you live. Is there anything in your heart that you'd like to share to complete us today?
The only thing I would say, brother, is people out in this world, if you're listening to me, one, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your patience. Thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity to be with my wonderful and phenomenal brother here, and his wonderful and phenomenal wife, and his wonderful and phenomenal community of all of you beautiful spirits that are there. The only thing I will tell you and I will leave you with is that be about action. Don't be about talking, right? Be about the action. What do you have to do? When you wake up tomorrow, what is on your mind? What do you have to do in order to advance yourself? Be about the action. We have all these great teachers and speakers that have come before us at all times, right? And we could talk fancy and we could do all of these things, but what are you doing with your life? What are you doing? When you wake up to the beginning of your day, to the end time, when you go to bed, what do your practices look like? What are you doing? What exactly are you doing? Are you living optimally? There are three phases: omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience. Those three faculties are the center being of who you should be, and then that is the total God of yourself. Three heads to the God of you. You can do it. There's no question about it. It's just a matter of will. So what I leave you with is be about action, master your will. Once you master your will, you'll master every decision in your life. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Bless.
Love you, brother. I love you.
Bless.
Have a beautiful night.
You too.
All right. All right.